Are you ready?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Parishscope. This is the podcast that acts as an arm as a newsletter, the Parishscope for St. John Sam Prairie. I'm Pastor Chris Sansom. Casey is out tonight. He's been a busy guy. He's had all kinds of stuff. But we do have our guest Jerry with us again. We got all kinds of convention stuff going on. And in fact, to be honest with you, we were just talking right before we got on. This is pretty much going to be the convention episode. I think we're just gonna push everything to the side. We're just gonna do the convention. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready for that. It's
all right.
It is overwhelming. The convention is.
Well, it is absolutely. Well, let's do the intro and then we'll get started. We'll just get going.
All right.
Another convention update. Furnace with them. Your source for the latest news and announcements from the 2026 Lutheran Church Missouri Synod National Convention taking place this July.
Evident that's not where I was.
Stay connected. Stay informed.
All right. So I know, Jerry, that you have been watching the convention by far more than me. Now, I try to watch here and there, and I always keep it on. Like when I'm in the office, it's like all background noise. And I try to pay attention anytime like a significant resolution comes up. And so I've been trying to pay attention to the best of my ability. But from kind of an outsider's view, what are some of the things that you're seeing? And what are some things that maybe we need to pay attention to?
Well, I think one of the first things is that, as I said, this convention, this whole thing is overwhelming. And I don't know if people listening understand the number of issues that arise, the amount of reading, and how you manage all of this into 4 or 5 days with, I think, it's approximately 700 plus delegates. And then you have, so your hall is just filled with voting delegates, the boards, and so on. So you've got to have order. And I don't understand it all. I'm just kind of like an outsider watching it all, but you do pick up things. And I think my first impression as a lawyer is this is just like a very complex lawsuit, and and it really is. And it made me, it almost humbled me to think, when people come into a courtroom, you use this language and you have this procedure, and I always hoped and prayed that people left understanding. So that's what I tried to hone in on first was what's this procedure? What are we doing? How do we get this under control? And I finally realized that this whole thing really starts years before with all the committees and so forth. And I guess I didn't realize that these people are working all the time. And all this gets started with something called an overture. And that can be anything from a recommendation. It can be giving somebody credit, to acknowledge, thank you, or it can be a really, really contested issue. And so, me and people taking positions, I just got sucked in to read. I did. I just woof into this, and people have to realize that these overtures come out in the handbook, and anybody can go on the site and download these.
Yep.
And that's pretty cool to think that we really are that transparent on a lot of the things that we do in this church. And so these overtures are single-spaced, 2 columns per page. And what is there, like 200 pages of these? And,
Tons.
Yeah. And it ends up being like 374 overtures. So it's like, okay, how are we going to get 374 overtures into 5 days with everything else that's going to come in?
Yeah. And they won't. At the end of the day, they're not going to get through all of them. They're going to try to highlight the most important, and that's the job of the floor committees. And you kind of said it earlier, like these guys on these floor committees are working just all the time. And like even after the convention's over, they go into their floor committees and they start, dabbling around with other stuff. Which
Oh yeah,
overture am I going to bring forward? Which one am I going to not? You know,
uh,
um,
yeah.
so yeah,
And this is work that's going on all the time, and these overtures, the ones that are contested, um, each side of these are written so that you can read it, and the why is there, and they're
yeah.
supported by the doctrine of our faith and Scripture, and each one is so you kind of like, well, gosh, well, yeah, somebody's got to take a position here, and it is the floor, and it gets started, and that's what amazed me is here's the it's like the clearinghouse. It's
Yeah.
it, it's just
So
like yeah.
kind of to your point, we had today there was a resolution, and just for your sake, I'll tell you which one it is. It was 09-18 and 09-15, and
Okay.
two resolutions that were basically calling for polar opposite things.
Hmm.
Um, one was to change the way we voted for president and make it go back to taking place during the convention, which is the way
Hmm.
we used to do it long time ago. And then 9-15 was basically uh, calling for us to maintain it the way it is, but maybe do things to help more people register to vote. So it was basically, one was saying, no, 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 we need to really embrace the way we're doing it now. And then the other one was, no, 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 we need to get rid of it and change it back. So, kind of to your point, we had two resolutions that were combating each other.
Did they finally come? I tried to find the minutes for today. Did they resolve that today, or is that still going to be tomorrow?
So no, they did, because 9-15 passed, which means that was to basically call on call on the Senate to basically help people register. So
Okay.
we're going to maintain voting the way it is, but then now we're going to try to hopefully get more people registered. And what this comes from is we had something like 900 people that voted. Well, we had something like 5,000 people that could have registered to vote.
Hmm.
So dramatic non non-registration of sorts. So that was what that was all about.
Well, I kind of gathered they were going to stay with that, but there was there was a lot of talk about it, um, and I think one of the things that I gotta admit, each at the end of each day, I would, run over to. And this is where I have to admit to Casey, I would do this. I would go look at some of the people's comments, and
Uh-oh,
they
we
weren't the
lost you,
one.
Jerry.
Okay, still there?
We lost
I'm
you for a
I'm in
second.
and out with
Where'd
my.
you run off to? You ran off somewhere and then
I,
we lost you.
okay, okay. I ran off to a post that people were making on other sites than the they were sending. And, I'm like, "Now wait a minute, people, all these things are out there. We're gonna they're you can read the agenda for the day." But I guess
Yeah.
what was getting some people is that how things get from an overture to a resolution really does happen behind closed doors. And
Yeah.
I I just wanted to comment about that. I mean, everything has a reason for being behind closed doors. It happens in our government, it happens in our law. I get it. You want to talk frankly about these things, and sometimes that's just better kept behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I
So
think there's
so
a
the
lot of transparency.
I was gonna say, so the way this generally works is like, let's say St. John Sam Prairie wants to make a resolution. They can tell me that resolution, and then what I can do is I can then bring it to my circuit, and my circuit can then bring it to the district, and then the district at convention can handle that resolution. And I think once we gather for a circuit forum, we can I can ask if a overture can come out of our circuit, and which would ultimately pass it to the district, which would pass it to the Senate.
Yeah,
And
it's
so, and then
procedure.
yeah, and then basically what the floor committees do is they try to take all those overtures, of which there's way too many,
Hmm.
and if they have a bunch of similar ones, they'll like take them all and try to compile them into one well worded one. Um, and then some they're just going to scrap because, yeah, and again, just so everybody's aware, like they're going to have some of them that are like commend so and so for so many years of service. Let us stand together and sing the doxology, and you get stuff like that too. And you can do some of those, but some of them get a little out of hand. Um, so yeah, some of those get scrapped. And so then, yeah, you're left with the best of the best, or at least hopefully you're left with the best of the best. You're putting a lot of trust in the floor committees. Uh, but yeah, then they bring it forward. But even then, they can't present all of their resolutions. I mean, hopefully they can, but they don't always. And so
Oh
then they
no.
have to pick and choose which ones they're going to bring forward to the Synod at convention.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing is those that are, they respectfully decline this overture, and they'll tell it's right in a little box. We respectfully decline it, but there
Yeah,
are a lot of them, and there's a lot of things that are basically just repeated. But when they do finally get there, it's fun to hear the debate on the floor on some of these issues, and of course they got to have order in the whole thing, and they
oh,
actually
absolutely.
they have a parliamentarian there, and I kind of got a kick out of it. I think I said this to you that they're doing calls to order and so forth, and somebody said, "Well, Robert says you can't do it that way," and the president says, "Oh no, we already passed a bylaw that said we can amend Roberts to do it that way." But I mean, people have to understand you got to get through it because there's a lot of elections going on. There's a lot of reports. It's just amazing how much stuff gets done in just 5 days, and that's
Yeah,
not counting all the time that they're out of session. So it's really a big thing, and it happens every 3 years, and it's
yeah,
big. Um,
yeah,
but I kind of thought about now. I take my 4 issues or biggies that I saw and see what you think. I The first one I was very happy to see was that they did take a stand on the sexual misconduct of church workers, and the task force has been created, and it's no one's putting their head in the sand. It's going to be addressed, and I thought that was very good.
yeah,
Uh, they're clearly not going to make this issue the issue that has become for the Catholic Church and so forth. They're going to do their best to come forth with that. But that led to quite the discussion about how what happens uh, when someone is accused of sexual misconduct and it's serious enough to warrant a crime, and then they resign. So does the church have their own convicted sex offender register? That that was something that came to issue, and some of the posts on this were interesting, and I just want to clarify something as a lawyer that um, in Illinois anyway, if you are a convicted sex offender of certain sex offenses, you must register.
yeah,
And but you don't, people don't understand. You don't necessarily have to register while you are incarcerated, so because you don't have an address yet,
yeah,
that and that people get all upset about that, and they go, "Well, this person's not registered." Well, they're in the Department of Corrections. That's why. But when they get out, they will be. So, um, and, that was something that they wrestled with. And as I understand it, once you're off the roster, particularly as a church worker, as a pastor, you're not getting back on. I kind of got that impression.
so whenever okay, so if you get kicked off the roster, like you did something and somebody has to come down and say no, you're no longer a pastor. Yeah, there's no coming back from that. You're gone. Now,
Mhm.
if you resign, like as in you want to try to maintain your ordained status, but you just don't have a church anymore, um, that's called CRM status, and that one gets a little bit dicey because as long as you didn't do anything that would basically make it to where you cannot be a pastor anymore, as long as you didn't do anything like that, you're still technically able to receive a call.
Okay.
And so, but if you have somebody who's committed a felony or like a, again, they're, some kind of a sex offender, they're off the roster. Like they're done. Like they can't ever be a pastor again, at least not in the Missouri Synod.
No.
So,
well, I think that's important to clarify for people because you're on the roster or you're not on the roster, and getting on the roster as a pastor is what that was the biggest, I think, issue in this convention so far was how do we form our pastors? Is there the residential way we do it, or is there another route? And that, as I understand it, that was the most attended open discussion that was had was
yeah.
this issue. And the people who were speaking about it were like, well, we're short on pastors. And then there was groups that said, no, we're not necessarily short on pastors, but that's not a reason to change the way we do it in the Missouri Synod. And that is that it's you're forming a whole mindset along with all of the academics, and you need to do that in a residential setting. You can't do that online. And that was a huge discussion. And I think they've kind of left it. The majority of it is intact, and maybe exploring some other things, but tossing around some things. But people start tossing around words like they meant the same thing, like the internet equaled distance learning, which equaled social media, which equaled technology, and it's like I wanted to. No, time out. They're different things. And I think the residential is the way to do it. It's very important. I think you and I probably agree that you learn so much being in the seminary, actually present there, that you just can't pick up online.
Yeah, I would so just to and this is one of the things I'm hoping to kind of do here at the podcast is at least when I can to give a little bit of history here. So our Synod has been wrestling with this forever, and I think I want to say it was 1989, somewhere around there. So whenever we had our convention in the late 80s, we passed this thing that called for something called lay ministers. And basically, lay ministers were very minimal trained people. And the objective was that if you were in a small country church and you couldn't afford a pastor, maybe you could train up one of your lay leaders and they could become effectively your pastor. For the time, so they were lay, so they weren't necessarily pastors, but at the same time, they could do communion and they could do absolution and they could preach sermons. And so you would kind of train them up in a very like almost like a correspondence course kind of thing. This is before the internet, so you didn't have any of that. And then basically after that time period, we had a little bit of debate because some of them, wanted to move churches, and then it was like, well, if they're going to take a call, now you got, now it's not so much a lay minister, now it's like a pastor, and so that actually became quite a bit of a debate. And so that's where that kind of started, and then it eventually moved on. See, and then they eventually ended up they whenever I was in seminary, so you're thinking gosh, when is that? Like 2004 to 2008 I was in seminary. They had what was known as a Delto program. And again, Delta wasn't all online. Again, online courses weren't really a big thing back then. And so you had a little bit of online something, but Delto stood for Distance Education Leading Toward Ordination. And so the objective was to eventually kind of move on from there. And basically you could do some distance education, some correspondence courses. So you could move on from there and then reach ordination. And then after that, we had a lot of infighting because we still had lay ministers. I'm sorry. we still had lay ministers. I'm kind of losing focus. I'm trying to hold too many things together, uh, and losing focus. Uh, so so what am I thinking? So anyway, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not we should maintain the lay ministry program or get rid of it. Eventually, we did actually get rid of it, but we also morphed what was known as Delto, and we morphed it into something completely different. We morphed Delto, the distance education leading toward education, and we morphed it into something known as SMP, Specialized Ministry Program. And then we also added special ministry programs um, leading towards ordination, basically that led towards ordination. So then you had some SMP pastors. Now they weren't as trained as much as, say, a fully residential guy, but at least you could get, a pastor who could say, let's say he was working at a church and working underneath somebody, and they could still be training and working towards, becoming a pastor. And so that was the SMP program. A lot of people didn't like it, partially because of kind of what we've been talking about, with the residential programming. Part of it because they just didn't feel like the education was good enough. They would have to learn Greek but not Hebrew, and that was kind of a complaint that they had. But then, just recently, like a couple years ago, a new institute came out. Now, and I realize, guys, I've been talking for 5 minutes, and I'm giving you guys like this massive history lesson. But I just want everybody, including you, Jerry, I want everybody to kind of understand where I guess this debate is kind of coming from. Um, in that, so what is it? What is it? What happened is a couple years ago, something came out called I think it was called the ILC, the International Lutheran Center, or something. It was basically a fully online seminary. Now, to add even more fuel to this fire, there was a professor at Concordia Seminary named Jeff Kloa. Jeff Kloa gave a presentation several years ago, and it was called The Plastic Text of the New Testament, or something along those lines. Now, what he was talking about was misconstrued, and it became a huge debate within our synod. People thought that he was trying to undermine the New Testament or undermine the inerrancy of God's word. That wasn't what he was talking about at all. What he was actually talking about was textual criticism and some of the new discoveries of some of the manuscripts and how people have sort of changed a few things. But needless to say, he ended up resigning his position at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. He ended up moving over. He was at the Bible Museum for a while, and realized, like, again, he was misconstrued. He was kind of hung out to dry a little bit. Well, he ended up, and I don't know how because I haven't followed him completely, but he ended up being basically the dean of this new ILC MDiv program. And so he kind of became the face of online education. And there were some people that were working underneath him and all that kind of stuff. But basically, they kind of pushed the envelope on this debate over whether or not you could have a fully online MDiv. That would be accepted by our synod. Okay, so I just talked for the last almost 10 minutes, and that's where I'm at right now. Jerry, I didn't know if you had anything else to offer to that, but again, I just wanted to give you the long form, here's the whole history of everything, kind of moving on anyway. I should say this though. I will say this. When I first chimed in, the first thing I saw was a man by the name of Heath Curtis. Now he's a Southern Illinois district president, a good guy, very smart man, but also very, very conservative. Does not like Kloa because of some of the stuff that he said. And he was the one presenting the resolution 6 I think 05A, which was over the schools. And Kloa was the one that was actually at the microphone. And so anyway, that was kind of the first thing I got to see was them two having an exchange. So I'm if you're hearing some dings in the background, I just got the message, and so basically I'm getting text. Jerry just lost internet connection, so we lost Jerry. So you know we don't have a live show. It's technically not live, but the problem is I can't really stop recording either. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just pause here, and then I can just cut some of this out. All right, everybody. Well, that was odd. We actually lost Jerry, and then we actually I kept talking. I kind of gave us a little bit of a history lesson, but then we decided, Jerry and I kind of talked. We decided we're going to kind of postpone it till the next day, and so here we are in the next day, and we're trying to pick up where we left off in the conversation, and we were talking about the difference between residential education and online education. Again, I gave you a little history of where we're kind of coming from and where we've been a little bit, but now it's kind of more like here's where we are, and so that's we're going to pick right up where we left off. That's where we were, and so we were talking about resolution. I can't remember which one it's in floor committee 6. I know that much.
Yeah, it's in committee 6, and the big discussion that I picked up from it was, okay, we need to have an easier route to have ministers because we have a shortage of ministers. And then there was a group that said, no, we don't really have a shortage of ministers. That's not the issue. And if you do that, you may be getting numbers, but you are not getting quality. And I think that's, one of the things that happens. But what was, to me, was the younger pastors were talking about the need for the process to relax a little. And then another group of younger pastors was going, no, you've just been through it. You know what a great thing it is. So I found that it was a little interesting that, well, within the same age group, there was this issue of make it a little bit easier. And that's what you're doing. You're making it easier, and easier isn't always the best.
Yeah.
And you're going to lose something. But see, we have the same issue right now in law schools, interestingly enough. And that's why I picked up on it, because you have some young lawyers who say, oh, this 3 years it's 7 years. It's miserable. You got to change it in the bar exam. And then you have other younger lawyers who are going, no, this is the rite of passage, and you got to be there. You got to do it. And it's mature. So it's not an argument or a debate that's limited just to pastors. It's a bigger.
I remember I watched a TV show, and I forget what it was. It was like one of those documentaries kind of thing. And they actually interviewed an LCMS guy, and they kind of put him on the spot, and they were kind of talking about, how many years of education it went. And I'll never forget, because he made a great comment. He made a great comparison. And I've always kind of utilized that comparison ever since. And he kind of said, look, a pastor is a seal sorger, a soul healer, so to speak. They deal with your faith. They deal with, what you believe, and ultimately, they deal with your salvation. That's kind of where they work. And the question then becomes like, so we have other healers in our society. What would you feel about that? Like, what would you feel about an online educated doctor? You going to let them handle the operation? Do you want them to be the surgeon in the room? And that's kind of that's always, that comparison has always kind of really stuck with me. When we start talking about the length of education, when we start talking about, like whether or not we should do residential or non-residential, I always come back to that comparison. I always go, well, if this was a doctor, would this be okay?
Correct.
And that's kind of a lot of where I come from with that.
In the same place I come from with it, with lawyers, you have to, there's a certain maturity, and you're just not going to get it. I don't want a lawyer who did everything online and then get hit with some issue in court that they've never, ever had to address in person. That's not good. Because talking to a computer is a lot different than talking to a jury.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And and again, that's not to say that they can't make certain exemptions and exceptions. I do, this is where like things like the S&P come in. I don't necessarily think the S&P is bad. S&P is specialized ministry, specialized ministry practice or something like that. But there's all kinds like the youth worker, the this, the that, and then they have one that does lead to ordination. And I do like the fact that it's more of an apprenticeship. You're working underneath a pastor. It's not like you're just getting some online education, doing a few things like whatever Phoenix I want to say, and then kind of moving on. There's certain things that you can learn online. I think they'd be completely okay, and then there's certain things that are not. And I think it's important to distinguish those two. And again, we can talk about it, and I don't think even the hardcore residential guys, I don't think they're unwilling to discuss maybe adjustments that could be made in the future. But the idea of just getting rid of the seminaries, in essence, for an all online school, I think is the real discussion that they don't want to see, and they want to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's the extreme. And I've listened to some of the presidents of the seminaries talk, and they're not saying there should not be any online function, but it's not the function. It's not the way to do it. It's not, they're not closing their minds to it, but that debate is. I was a little surprised that there was that many people who were arguing. You just gotta go online. We have to have an online program. We just have to. We just have to, but they did.
Well,
But
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say the other part of that though is that like I do get their concern, and I think it's important to take that concern realistically, because a lot of these guys are coming from areas or maybe even churches that again, we come back to and here's where Casey's not around to talk to us, but our Savior was vacant for over 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's some other circumstances that play into that, but the reality is that like they called and called and called, and and just nobody, and I think you're seeing a lot more of that, like a lot more of it's getting harder and harder to get a pastor. So there is, at the very least, there's definitely big signs of a pastoral shortage. And I know some people will say, well, some of these churches need to close or, partner up and become like dual parishes and stuff like that. And it's like, that's easy when you're standing on the outskirts. Whenever you're the one who's, pie in the sky, just looking down, it's much harder whenever you're a member of that church.
Exactly.
And
I think, and the argument has some merit because of many times because of their international situation, but they did kind of come down on the 40-year-old mark. And you might want to explain that to the listeners, why it's okay if you're 40 or older to maybe enter into these special ministries.
So they did talk about the 40-year mark. I didn't actually catch that discussion, but that's okay. There's I know several different thoughts, but a lot of it has to do with maturity, right? Like again, you've talked about maturity a couple times. One of the things about residential, and again, so some of the ways in which some of these churches have abused the S&P is that they've basically said, okay, we're going to get a young guy fresh out of college. We're going to teach him a few things, and then he's going to be our apprentice. And so he can work as basically an associate pastor, but without the associate pastor pay. And then eventually we'll take him on as our associate pastor. And here's the deal. Since he's been working as an apprenticeship under me, he knows me. He knows my church. He knows all the ins and outs of it. And so he's been trained up just to run this one church, in essence.
Right.
And so there's actually a lot of draw for that for some of these churches. And I'll be frank, they're more or less the mega churches, the bigger churches in our synod. And they've really been kind of utilizing that in a sense. And so what the seminary, in essence, wants, what the synod wants, is they instead want to say, no, we want this to be, and this is what the whole thing, all the way back with the lay ministry, the Delto program, all of this has always been about those small churches, say, in the country.
Mhm.
You know, you got, 100 or less members, you worship, 50, 60, 70 people on a Sunday, and you can't quite afford to get a pastor, but you have a guy who's willing to function as your pastor. What are you going to do? Because we have a right as a congregation. Walther would argue we have a right to call our minister. And so the school's response has always been like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to train him. Here's how we're going to get him up to speed. And so he could work under, like, say, the circuit visitor or a nearby pastor to, in essence, become the pastor but the point being is it was always a thing of necessity in the field. It was not a thing of luxury. And I think some of these churches are using the SMP program more as a thing of luxury, just so that they can get, so they can, instead of getting a pastor who's, been through seminary and understands different churches and different avenues, this way the young man would only understand their church. And I think there's some elements of that. Now, I will also say this, though, and this is, with the committee that put all that together and did all that, we discussed this because Zach Zender did a podcast, and he's like, hey man, this 40-year-old thing, like, that's no good. And then when Casey and I dug into it, I noticed that there was a little star by the 40, and looking below, it basically said, hey, an exception can be made if the Council of Presidents agrees,
Right.
And I thought that was really wise, right? Because let's say you have like a 30-year-old who's in a situation where he wants to be a pastor, but he doesn't quite fit those qualifications, but he also can't leave for seminary. The Council of Presidents can then say, okay, you're an exception to the rule. We're not going to make exceptions for like a million other things, but you're an exception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if the exception is there, it's there. I mean, that's that. What do we say? We have more exceptions to the general law than we have to the law. But they are exceptions, and I read that book, The Ends of the LCMS, Barron, and I think you have to be very cautious in reading that book because I think the point of his book is to argue for some non-residential training, and or some delegation. And I never got the impression that the Synod was against delegating non-pastoral duties more. That's not the problem, I don't think, with them.
No, and they don't really have an issue with that. Sometimes we squabble over the ins and outs of various things. I know, for instance, one of the things that was going to come up, and I don't know if we ever got to it, but it was talking about lay readers.
Yes.
Whether or not churches should use lay readers, how they should use lay readers and stuff like that. And so here you have kind of an example that kind of is like, in the gray area, so to speak. And the reason it becomes in the gray area is because as a called worker, I am called to act as the corporate, if you will, the corporate proclaimer of God's word, God's news. And as the corporate proclaimer, the person who does it in groups, in a sense, that would mean the reading of scriptures would fall on my shoulders. Walther has always kind of given the ability of those that in certain instances can assist the pastor in some things. And so there is a little bit of a squabble. Is this something that we can basically push off to those that are assisting the pastor and those are not? And I don't know if we've gotten to that one yet, but I know that one was in the docket.
It was, and my impression was it just basically kind of got tabled. Nobody wanted to go there.
Yeah.
And I think that's because there was also in the overtures, there was an overture to revisit and do away with women's suffrage in the church so that women couldn't serve on the boards.
Yeah.
And they just said, we're not going there.
Yeah. So this is always funny, but like, this is actually, so as a pastor, I fill out these forms. One's called a pastoral information form, and one is called an SET, a self-evaluation tool. And in the SET, and this is something that's, for instance, if you're a church and you say, hey, I want to know more about this pastor, I'm thinking about calling him kind of thing, you would look at a person's SET. Well, if you look at my SET, it asks me whether or not I agree, and I think it's like resolution 4-03 something, yada 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 yada. But again, it was back in like the 80s, or maybe it was the 90s, where they basically passed allowing for women's, not, I don't think it was women's suffrage. I think it was women's, whether or not women could be on an elders board. And so it's like, hey, do you agree with this or not? And it's like, well, I mean, we're a synod, we walk together. So if it passed, I'm not gonna buck the trend here. I understand what they're trying to say. So anyway, but it is funny because like that, we bring up women's suffrage. That is something that comes up even in the SET file.
Yeah, it's in the overtures, in here and there, and a little bit of everywhere. But they, evidently I think it was 20, 30 years ago, they've come down on the side that women can serve in certain non-pastoral positions.
Mm-hmm.
And they could be on the church council and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's I don't think they're going to leave that position. I think it's pretty much done. But it comes up. So again, here we go. Everybody's got an opinion. They got a chance to voice it. That kind of leads me to the one that is about, it's about Charlie Kirk. And I don't know if, and Charlie Kirk was very, very popular.
Yes.
And there was I gotta look, because as I said,
there's a couple of them. There's a couple resolutions in there, I noticed.
There was. In the Life Together Committee, there was like 452, 53, 54, 453 through 55 recognizing Charlie as a martyr. And that did not get passed. What got passed was basically a new form that said we stand against political violence. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is we talked about how this convention keeps going, moving all the time. There's always something going on. And I pulled up today's business issue, and I got to download it again, evidently. And if I'm reading this correctly, all right, we dealt with it. We're not going to call out Charlie Kirk in his name. But when we look at today's business for July 23rd, which is today, we go through our consent and the resolution action, which I had to tell Casey, I will not understand that chart till the day I die. But there is what's called new delegate resolutions to address modern day martyrdom. It's a new resolution. It appears on the business, and it again brings up Charlie Kirk. And the resolve is several resolves, but that the Senate give thanks and praise to God for the steadfast faith of our Christian brothers and sisters who face persecution, and give thanks and praise for the encouragement and example of faith given to us by Christian martyrs. And on and on. None of the resolves actually mention Charlie, but the whereas does. Whereas the public assassination of Charlie Kirk and suspicions that Kirk's faith played a large role in the attacker's motive have brought concerns for many parishioners about growing violence against Christians in America. So I think if I'm reading that correctly, that's going to be again discussed today, and maybe a resolution come down, especially addressing martyrdom. And I think that is something that young people are watching.
Yeah.
I may be reading that wrong, but that's kind of the cool thing about this convention. It's like, boy, you miss a minute, you miss something. And
and they're big things.
They're big things.
So yeah. So, you know, and again, I guess I could say I didn't expect the Charlie Kirk one to pass. And so that doesn't necessarily surprise me. I do like the way this one that you just read, I do like the way that one is more or less worded. Because here's the thing, like Charlie Kirk, he was a Christian and he held Christian values. And he spoke very much about his Christianity, about his Christian faith. But at the end of the day, he was assassinated because of his politics. Now, his Christianity and his Christian values played a role because they are formed the foundation for how he became the politician he was. You know, love him or hate him, like that was, you know, his Christian values are why he was on the side of the fence, you know, politically that he was. And you don't necessarily have to agree with him, but at the same time, like you have to admit, like his Christian values played a role in that. But at the same time, he wasn't killed because he was a Christian. He was killed because he was a very vocal and influential Republican.
Right.
And, you know, there is a distinction there. Now, I will say, though, that does bring up a lot of points, right? Because, you know, and we've talked about this before, and I know you and I have talked personally, and I've talked on the podcast, like, a lot of times like Republicans and Christians will end up in the same place, but the way we get there is just wildly different. Like, you know, we're following Holy Scripture as our foundation, and we're saying, yeah, that we're against this because we believe it's sinful. They're over here, you know, especially the ideologue Republican is going to say, well, I'm over here because, you know, I think this is good for GDP. I think this is good for this, and this is good for economics. And, you know, we're glad that people are concerned about economics and all those things. But at the end of the day, that's something completely different than where I'm from. You know, we end up at the same place. We're at the same place. So, you know, yay. But at the same time, like there's something that I always try to caution people about that. But as the more, if our culture continues to do what it's going to do, that's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be good enough to have a divide. It's not going to be, you know, just by saying, like, again, to say I'm against abortion is becoming a hot button issue. To say that I believe abortion is sinful is now going to be a hot button issue, and it might cause somebody to be angered or upset at me, and you know, and who knows, you know, what the future holds. So I think there is time to say, okay, we need to actually talk about this, and you know, talk about what it means to suffer violence for one's faith.
Those last few words you said, I think, are the key. Is to suffer violence because of one's faith, and yeah, I think that there's no, you know, part of the problem with Charlie Kirk from the debate point was it was too political. For many of the people arguing, no, he wasn't. That wasn't not the only reason he was killed. Whereas we do have martyrs that clearly they were killed solely because of their Christianity.
Yes.
Have a lot of them, and I think that was a distinction. But that the way it's presented now is we can say to people, you know, Charlie Kirk was an example of someone who did not hide their faith, who took their faith out to the world.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. And I think I like this better than we stand against political violence, because I don't know what political violence means. I mean, it sounds like crazy. What do you mean you don't know what political violence means? But because it uses the word political, I don't know where that's as a if we're talking here with Christians being persecuted, that's where we should, in my opinion, leave it. It's not politics; it's Christianity that's under attack.
So I actually got a question for you, because this is one I've always kind of wrestled with a little bit, and I don't get, because I feel like this is kind of one and the same, right? Like shouldn't we just be against violence?
Yeah.
You know, and this is what I'm saying with this. Like, this is where, like, you know, you see this on TV and everything, and I understand there's different laws and different things that apply, but you know, I always say, like, you know, somebody will get murdered and they'll say, well, this is a hate crime. And I'm like, well, yeah, they murdered somebody. You don't murder somebody you care about. Usually, usually you hate them, and that's why you murder them. And I know that there's certain distinctions for that, but I've never understood why we have those distinctions. If a person kills another person, and let's say a white person kills somebody who's African American, who's black, I don't really care why the white person did it. Like, it's bad, it's wrong. They should be punished for what they've done. And I think those laws should be equal. And I've never understood why we have this broad distinction. And so maybe you can actually help me understand that, or maybe you don't know either.
Well, it's because it's political. If you look at the way laws are enacted in our country and in our state, somebody has an issue, and now and here's the phrase: there ought to be a law against that. And by golly, we have now done that. There should be a law about hate crimes. There should be a law about killing with a gun versus killing with a knife. Now, to me, you got the 10 Commandments. Killing is killing.
Yeah.
What part of this don't win? But you have to understand that all of these different crimes, now they carry with them what's called an enhancement because you used a gun, or it's an enhancement because it was motivated by hate, and that adds to the sentence, and it adds to the amount of time that you might possibly be looking at in terms of punishment. So I guess the best way to describe this is when I started out in practice in 1977, the Illinois Revised Statutes were in these big red bound books.
Yeah.
Three of them. They just took up one corner of my desk. When I retired from the bench, they went clear across my bench onto the floor because we passed that many laws.
Wow.
And it's, and it makes it difficult. Now, as a judge, it makes it very difficult because you are now in charge of instructing the jury. And of course, you're stuck within the confines of what the charged crime is and so forth, and what the law is. And then you inform the jury what the law is and to follow that law. The number of times that jurors come back with a question, what does this mean? It is amazing. And then, of course, you think the Senate fights, then we fight among judges. Do you answer that question or don't you? And it's like, we define in our instructions, or we define in the statute what's a hate crime. Who decides is the prosecutor. They decide whether or not to bring that crime or not. That's how they all get started. Prosecutor doesn't file it, it doesn't get filed.
Yeah.
But we just made it much more complicated, in my opinion, than it has to be.
Yeah.
But that's why, because think to yourself, how many times when we're all guilty of it? Well, there ought to be a law against that. Well, don't say that too loud, because there will be against that particular thing.
Well, and again, I guess that's just part of the thing that's always confused me. It's like, if we already have a law against that thing, why have another law on top of that law against that thing? And it's like, again, if somebody is guilty of murder and they've committed murder, like, that's the most version of hate you can have, is to actually kill somebody. And so why on earth would you then turn around and say, well, we want an extra law on top of that law? Again, that's just always been my 2 cents. But again, in terms of like what we're talking about, I feel like the same thing here. Like, yeah, okay, yes, we're against political violence. I guess if it needs to be said, we'll say it. But at the same time, as a church, we're really more or less against most violence. I don't know of many exceptions. There might be some. Like, we believe that a country has a right to go to war for certain causes. But even that, we still pray for peace. We still want the war to come to an end. We understand that it has to be, but we still want it to stop.
Well, I think I like the focus of where they're. I don't know what's going to happen to this today, because remember, they're on Pacific time, or if it came out as a new resolution. So I guess it can come up or not come up. We never know. I mean, it's the procedure. But I think the important thing, and as I read many of the overtures, was it's part of our duty as a Christian to be not to hide it, but to be vocal about the point. You take the consequences of being a Christian, and that's what I think is the message here. We are united, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Don't hide it. Don't hide it. So, but I found that was the Charlie Kirk issue was one that was very popular with the 3 or 4 overtures to it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. All right. What else did you see in there?
Well, and this is one that I have to totally defer to, and I think they kind of left it alone. But there's always a point in time where we talk about open communion and closed communion, and again, this discussion came up, and as best I can read, what the result was, it was encouraging pastors to shepherd that administration carefully, which,
Sure.
and it's as I understand, it's your discretion. But that comes up, as I look back, that's something that comes up often in the Synod. I mean,
yes, it does, and part of it is because we have such distinct practices from one church to another. So again, kind of giving you a little bit of history here. The term closed communion, it's way back in the history book. Like, go all the way back to like Saint Augustine and prior to Constantine. And what the church would do is they would have their service, and then they would actually invite people to stand up and basically leave, and then they would close the doors. And that closing of the doors meant it was closed communion, because then they'd have communion for, dare I say, the faithful in there. And so they would close the doors and like usher everybody else out, and then they'd have communion. And so that's where the term actually comes from, in this idea of closed communion, is we're just going to have it. Now, in those days, the one church, if I let's say St. John Sam Prairie was a church, and then there was another church, Trinity in Manitou, I didn't necessarily know what was going on in Manitou. And so my worshipers would not go to the church in Manitou, because we don't know what's going on there. Now, again, as time moved on, some of these pastors started writing letters to the other churches saying, hey, here's what I believe, and here's what we believe, and if we can agree with this, maybe my member here can take communion at your church. And so, these letters kind of became part of it, and that's kind of where we see the early dawnings of the church kind of coming together in a very united front, realizing that no, we're all moving and walking kind of together in this. And again, you're looking at the early days of Christianity, and there was just so much false Christianity out there, and so if I was a pastor at my church, how was I to know, if one of my members says, well, I'm going to go to this church over here in Manitou, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. I don't know who those people are. I don't know what they believe and what they were, maybe they're Christian, maybe they're not. And so there was always that kind of discussion. But once these letters started, then it started to be a little bit more open, as long as you kind of had that letter, that letter that made a statement, like the pastor was saying, here's what we believe, he's a good standing member of the church, and yada, yada, yada. Fast forward to the future, past the Great Schism of, like 1059 or whatever it was AD, and then past the Reformation, now all of a sudden you're beginning to see a lot more in terms of what we now call denominations. Up until like probably the mid 1800s, all these denominations understood that when they celebrated communion, they celebrated only inside of their denominations. Period. Like, a person who was Presbyterian or a Calvinist would not go to a Lutheran church and want communion. They just wouldn't. It was anathema to them. They would think it was horrible. Like, and vice versa, and we wouldn't go to the Catholics, and so on and so forth. Everybody understood that they believed different things, and as they believed different things, that we didn't share communion, because communion is all about coming together and believing the same things, and at least having some form of standard of understanding of what we believe. Paul talks about how, like, we everybody highlights chapter 11, like 10 and 11, but we don't highlight chapter like 9 and 10, or at least the early part of 10, where Paul is talking about how if you go to the altar of idols, you're basically agreeing with that idolatry.
Mhm.
And so if you go to the altar of a Methodist, or if you go to the altar of, a Presbyterian or a Baptist, you are in essence saying, I agree with this. And so if you take communion up there, and you're taking something from that altar, you are in essence saying, yes, I agree with everything that's preached and taught here, at least the standards that you guys demand. And so, that's kind of the way everybody understood it. Somewhere around the mid 1800s, all that started to change. I don't know which denomination did it first. I'm not going to point fingers, but at some point, one of them started opening their doors in terms of communion. And their basic argument was, if this is just a symbol and not really Jesus, then who cares who takes it? And then the line was just, as long as you're baptized, you're okay. But eventually, in some churches, even the whole idea of being baptized fell away. Like, it just didn't matter. Like, again, this is symbolic. This isn't real. This isn't anything significant. So therefore, who cares? Everybody can take it. Anybody can take it. And, okay, so yeah. So you got all that kind of going down the line. Now watch as we, the march of the Lutheran Church, specifically what has become the LCMS. And one of the things that's happened is you're getting a lot of people, especially people that visit churches, and they visit all these. Well, the other week I was at Table Rock, and that's near Branson. And so I went to a church, an LCMS church, that was near Branson. Sorry. They probably had 20, 30 visitors that day, or maybe it was less than that. Like, but who cares? Like, even if they had 10 visitors that day, like, that's 10 visitors, and how do you know? And not all of them announced to the pastor. And so how does the pastor know if they're Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever? But if they are, say, Baptist or non-denom or whatever, they believe in open communion, which means they believe that they should be able to go anywhere and take communion. And so they're not going to know. And it's not because they're trying to be mean or rude or something like that, but they'll come to the altar because they simply don't know any better. And so what does the pastor do with that? And what happens is, the pastor might try to put something in the bulletin or make an announcement or, whatever it happens to be. But, regardless, if you get that many visitors that consistently, eventually it becomes what's known as practically open communion or practical open, which is to say, we just don't know. We don't know, we don't know everybody. And again, like, think about this, like, on the big days like Easter and Christmas Eve, we sometimes have over 300 people, in our services. A lot of them are family and friends. A lot of them, in fact, most of them are actually LCMS. They're just visiting from other places. They don't all come talk to me. So what am I to do, right? Like, and again, this is where it kind of comes with, like, I'll do the best I can. It's not going to be perfect, but I'll do the best I can. But I'm not trying to offend them either. And so this is where you get these certain guys that are like, no, we need to be closed. We need to be closed. Our synodical standing is called close, which puts it under pastoral discretion.
Yeah.
Which means by and large, it should only be LCMS members, but there is a little pastoral discretion there. And so I can kind of make some decisions. And so, yeah. And then there's the hardcore guys that really want closed communion, which is to say, only my church. Only, you can only come to communion if you are a member of St. John Sam Prairie. Like, if you're a member of Trinity, in Manitou, too bad. You're not my member. And so, and I know that seems hardcore, but at the same time, realize there is some rationale behind that. Right. And the rationale is, like, I'm the shepherd of this flock. I'm going to know who they are. I'm going to know them. I'm going to personally know them. And therefore, kind of thing, like, I'm going to kind of be a watch over them so that I know I know what their standing is on a very personal level, not just like some generic, like, oh, I'm part of the LCMS, but like I actually know what they're, what they're about, so to speak. And so there is a rationale to it. Whether you buy it or not is a whole different thing, but that's, there's a rationale. But that's kind of where this debate kind of comes from. And there's really some guys that see, and again, just like anything, like everything that we've been talking about, right? Like there are some churches within our synod that heavily abuse this. And then there are some that heavily abuse it on the other side. And so the question is where do you go? And our synod has kind of always fallen right in the middle.
Yeah, I think there was a big discussion about leaving this to the pastor's discretion because you can have people. It's what's in the the person, what's in their heart, and that's the important thing. And that person realizes that if they're taking communion for the wrong reasons, there's some consequences for that. And I think you got again, it's the exception, and it is the nice part of having the discretion.
Yeah. And again, it is, and I again, you just look at it, and what generally happens is you take any exception, and it becomes the rule because people abuse the exception.
Yeah,
and this is one of those clear, which is why these guys are so adamant that we need to close it up. And I feel their pain because I know some of these churches and I know what they do, and I get it. I get why they're so frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, that church in Branson, I gave them as an exception, but to be honest with you, that pastor down there was actually really good. Personally held conversations with every single one of those visitors. So, I mean, and he had his ways about doing it, and I thought it was very, very well done. But I also know there's some churches where, like, they might have 100 visitors in a week, and they can't do it.
They can't do it. It's impossible.
And so then that becomes the question, like, is a church, and then this is a whole other category, which we never get into in convention, but the underlying question, which becomes, can a church become too big?
Yeah.
And there is, I think there is a point where a church becomes too big. And when it becomes too big, you can't have those personal relationships with people. It just becomes unwieldy. And I think that's no good for the church. But I digress. I could talk forever about that one.
I think that I might have heard one or two comments about, we are not and do not want to be a mega church.
Yeah.
There was those comments. So,
yeah.
I mean, overall, that was basically, reading the overtures in and of themselves, we could discuss for a year. But after the, it's important. It was good that, they went through the process and came out with the resolutions. My overall experience with this is I thought it was interesting. I thought it was good for, me as a member to kind of be in tune to what's going on here. And for me, a lot of it was like, this is like I said in the beginning, this is like a very complex litigation. It's, there's things coming from all sides, and you have to have a procedure, and you have to rely on precedent, and you have to get there. You have to get to the end. And if you can't, well, those are the things that just didn't make it this time. But I did find that I expected there would be maybe that's, and I shouldn't have expected it because many conferences, legal conferences and judicial conferences, end up the same way. In some of the committees, you can have very good fights, but once you get to the floor, you're very respectful. And I thought the underlying thing was continuity.
Yeah.
Everybody that was the one person who wasn't, all of the vice presidents were reelected except for Bierman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he lost out, I think, to Ball.
Yeah. And that doesn't surprise me. Benjamin Ball's, he's well known, but he's very, very conservative. So
yes, yeah. So I think everyone's looking. This clearly is going to be the last term for this president, and the urgency that I felt from many of the podcasts before the Senate convention just seemed to go away once we really got into it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which kind of leads me, many times, and you hear it all the time. What are you going to do? Where are we going to be in our church in 10 years? And all like this. And the one thing I walked away from this convention was, you really do need to have unity. You have to have faith. And you can come up with all kinds of ideas that you may think are going to increase membership or whatever, but it's really in the hands of God. And that's what so many of these guys, conveyed and were right about. It was reassuring to me.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. Good old convention. And you'll notice, like, because I know you're like connected to all the online chatter and stuff, and yeah, you'll notice that like after the convention, it's going to die down. It'll take a little bit, but it'll die down, and eventually we'll be in much better shape on the online front. It's always at least a little embarrassing right now with all the chatter because it's just so public. And I know it, on the one hand it's very transparent, I guess, but on the other, I don't necessarily like to watch all these people like argue over minutia, basically.
Correct.
And so it'll be a nice change of pace for me when it's all over. I don't like it. But that's also me. Like, that's also one of the reasons I don't like going to the convention, because I feel like I see the worst of my Senate.
Oh yeah.
You get to see the people that act and be the worst, and it's just no good to me. So anyway,
yeah. Well,
so
clearly
anyway,
there is a political aspect to it, because these people want their position to become the doctrine, and
yes,
it's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is, and again, it's a necessary thing. I understand that it's necessary. I don't begrudge the people that do go and do enjoy it and do take a lot. It's just, again, from my own standpoint, it's just the worst part of my Senate, because it's where people fight and argue and are bitter, and and again, it's just like, it's to me, it's not what my church is about. Because honestly, like, the Synod as a whole is awesome. Like, there's a reason I'm a Missouri Synod Lutheran. I love the Missouri Synod. I love the doctrine that they hold to, that we hold to. I love my church, but at the same time, like, just like all things, it has moments where maybe it's not. It's got a little ugliness that kind of creeps in. And again, in this case, it's one of those things that's necessary, unfortunately, but it is what it is.
It was sort of like judicial elections. It's necessary. But I was impressed with how well it was run. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people with opinions, and it marshaled through. It was just good to see. But and like I said, it was at the end of the day, there was unity and an understanding there needs to be unity. And then just what you said, we are a church, and we should be very proud of that church and be involved in that church. And the doctrine is what it is, and it's
yeah.
So I've actually enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, I mean, I'm just looking at my time here, and we've been on, for this section for 48 minutes.
You got some editing to do.
Well, I'm not going to edit too much. I mean, hey, every now and again, you just gotta have a long episode. So that is what it is. So what I will do, though, is we have to end at least with church chatter.
Yes.
You just got to, even though. So
to our last segment, probably.
All right, are we ready for church chatter?
Oh yes, that's right. Casey makes an appearance at last. I'll make him say goodbye too. But anyway, handling the church chatter. Now, for those of you that don't know, the big church thing that was happening at Our Savior was the VBS program, and that took out Casey for a good 2 weeks. 1 week because of his practicing, the next week because he was actually running it, and then there was some other stuff that came up this week. So he's just a busy guy. But I know the VBS was the big thing over there. I don't know if they have anything else coming up, but from our standpoint, we're we're most of the way through July. We're looking at August, and we're starting to look ahead at some of the other things that are coming up. I know the month of August is going to be kind of slow, but then toward the end and into September, we're going to start all those fall activities right back up again. So Sunday school, I know, starts in early September, right?
Yeah, right after Labor Day weekend.
Right after Labor Day weekend, so we'll look forward to that. Also got the photos for our directory. That's coming up toward the end of this month, actually probably in about a week. We're looking forward to that, but we'll have another chance to take photos in October for those of you that can't make the end of July dates. Had a fish fry this past Friday. That really went well. I can't remember all the numbers, but I think we had something like 140 people that came through. It was a good time had by all. If you missed it this year, it sounds like we're going to do it again next year. So hopefully you mark your calendars and come and enjoy some really good fried fish. So
You got
all right.
140 people.
What am I missing?
Well, you missed a special guest at the fish fry, the dog.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, we had this. So okay, so we had the fish fry, and all of a sudden this dog shows up, and the people frying the fish, they gave him some water, and I think some other people gave him a little bit of food because he looked run through, in a sense. He'd been through it. He looked muddy and polite, nice dog. So anyway, they came. Some people went searching online and found out this dog was from like Washington, and they never quite got a hold of the owners. I know they eventually got in charge with TAPS, but this dog had been spotted in Washington, and I felt like somebody was looking for him. Made it all the way out here. Who knows how long that took? But anyway, TAPS came and picked him up, which was a really great thing. We got a few pictures. I wanted to post them, but I was hesitant a little bit. I wanted to kind of have the full story before I posted it. So anyway, maybe that's something for the future to look forward to. But yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. That's a
great story. We reached out with some humanity there to a little doggy, and
yeah, absolutely.
And I want to give special thanks to both you and Casey for let me be a guest for the convention here. This has been fun.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, to be fair with you, I don't think it's quite over yet. I mean, I think we still have more stuff to discuss.
Well, you're gonna have another law to discuss, and that's that's been signed, and that's basically the right to die statute. I'm paraphrasing it, but
did that one make it through Illinois?
It did. I have it sitting on my desk right now. Yeah.
Ooh. I didn't realize it had passed. I expected it to. I heard about it and I expected it to. But yeah, no, we'll have to save that for next time. But yeah, we have to discuss that one as well. So, all right. Well, that's all I have for us today. I don't know if you have anything else, but
no, this has been fun.
All right. Well, hey everybody. Blessings. Bye.